Ukraine says it now controls around 8,000 square kilometers of Russian territory. Kyiv's surprise offensive, the biggest attack on Russian soil since the Second World War, has prompted a swift response. President Vladimir Putin has sent tank and troop reinforcements to the Kursk region. He accuses Ukraine of sowing unrest and trying to gain leverage before any possible peace talks.
Thousands of people moving to safer places as Ukrainian troops seize control of dozens of Russian villages. Reporting to Russian President Vladimir Putin, the governor of Kursk said Ukraine had widened its area of control.
The situation in the Kursk region is difficult. 28 settlements are under enemy control. There is no clear front line, and the problem we have is understanding where the enemy combat units are.
Around 1,000 Ukrainian troops rammed through the Russian border last week into the Kursk region with tanks and armoured vehicles. They have now advanced into neighbouring Belgorod. Ukraine says it controls about 1,000 square kilometers, an area bigger than New York City, in Kursk alone. The surprise attack exposed the weakness of Russian border defences in the area. President Volodymyr Zelensky, who only acknowledged the incursion over the weekend, says Ukraine will offer humanitarian assistance to evacuees on the Ukrainian side of the border. The Russian army is scrambling to contain the breach and has been forced to call in reserves. It has released images of what it says are strikes on Ukrainian tanks in Kursk. Putin says Moscow's army will prevail.
It appears that the enemy, with the help of Western masters, is fulfilling their will, and the West is fighting us with the hands of the Ukrainians. The enemy will get a decent response and all our goals will be achieved.
Russian volunteers are distributing humanitarian aid to evacuees arriving at temporary accommodations, making them painfully aware of the impact of a war that Putin has tried to shield them from.
I'd like to bring in Ivana Stratner, a research fellow specializing in Russian security and military strategy at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. That's a Washington-based think tank. Welcome to DW News. So the Kremlin, as we've seen in that last report, no longer able to hide this from Russians. How has Putin been trying to do damage control?
So indeed, they were not able to hide this. As a matter of fact, Telegram channels have been reporting about this extensively, and they have no choice but to play now the victim. Last week, you had numerous attempts actually to hide this situation, but now the Kremlin actually has stated that Ukraine, with the help of British intelligence, they're trying actually to organize, to sow discord within the country and to completely destroy Putin's regime. Basically, now they're playing the victim, trying to blame the West for plotting a new color revolution. To me, it was also very interesting to actually observe how they connected this whole situation with the collapse of the Soviet Union and to claim that Russia has to be now united. As a matter of fact, they're now targeting specifically the youth and trying also to connect this with the latest attempts to ban and to disable YouTube, but also WhatsApp and Signal messaging. So to completely prevent the information spaces, they claim that this is all plotted and organized there to target the Russians. Not only that, actually, they also claim that Ukraine has done this with the help of the West to have a better stance when it comes to negotiation. So now they are blaming the West also for that particular thing.
So coming at this from many different angles, one thing that I think is interesting also here is that Putin has been criticized from within Russia, from within his own party. One lawmaker claiming that there was intelligence about Ukraine's plans well ahead of the incursion. What do you think went wrong here?
Indeed, I have also noticed a couple of people within the Russian government blaming also Putin for his failure to warn the Russians of the situation. They claim actually that there were numerous intelligence reports that Ukraine was already on the border. So here is the thing. There is a high level of the rise in nationalism within Russia, which means that the Russians are not going to forgive Putin's weakness. That's his biggest problem, and that's his biggest vulnerability. And this is precisely why he's now trying to blame the West for sowing the discord within the country, trying to unite the Russians over this situation. But make no mistake, this is Putin's weakness, and that is something that he fears more than anything else.
Now, does Russia have the resources to fight Ukraine on this new front?
As you have just stated earlier, that they are trying now to mobilize from reserves, which tells you really all you need to know, that Russia's performance in Ukraine, it's not going well as Putin claims. So at the moment when they start pulling people from reserves is going to, I believe, cause more troubles for Putin than some people, believe in the West. As a matter of fact, we also know that previous wars, such as the war in Afghanistan, was in large part stopped also by the Russian mothers who protested back then the regime. They were sending youth in another countries to fight wars. So let's see, whether this is going to cause more trouble within Russia. As of today, I do not believe that something like that is going to bring Putin's regime down. But make no mistake, this definitely shows Putin's weakness, and that's something that we should be watching more closely.
It is interesting to see those fractures there. I'm curious also, just looking at this from a military perspective, when you look at Ukraine's incursion here, whether you think this will change Russia's strategy in the long term. Will they have to look at reinforcing other longer parts of the border?
So Russia's strategy is definitely in the long run, which means that Putin wants to make this war a protracted war. He does not need to win in 2024. He is totally going to be fine to make this war as long as possible to exhaust the West, especially now with the US elections. So I don't believe, that this is going to completely change Putin's strategy when it comes to Ukraine. However, I do believe that this exposed Putin's vulnerability within Russia. But nevertheless, we have to perceive this war through Putin's lenses, because his strategy is a strategy in the long run. And that's why we should not relax right now. As a matter of fact, we should continue sending all the weapons Ukraine needs to win.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us on DW News. That is Ivana Stradner with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
So for a closer look at what is happening here, let's bring in Marina Maron at the War Studies Department at King's College London. Welcome, Marina. Good to see you again. Vladimir Putin has said Ukraine is failing in its attempt to destabilize Russia and weaken his grip on power. Is he right?
Good evening, Claire. Well, what should we expect Vladimir Putin to say in this situation? Of course, this is a political message. It doesn't necessarily have to reflect the reality on the ground, which might be different. However, that being said, what Russia is trying to do right now is to control at least the internal information space, especially as many reports are coming from the Kursk region, and there are some contradictory reports. So this is an attempt to control the narrative and to reassure the Russian population that everything is under control.
And just how disruptive is this Ukrainian offensive to ordinary Russians' lives? We now know there are more than 120,000 people evacuated from the Kursk region. Evacuations also underway in the neighboring Belgorod region.
That is correct. Well, I suppose that for the people who are immediately in the vicinity of where the hostilities are taking place, this will be very disruptive and very scary, because until now, they were looking at this war from their TV screens. Now they can actually feel it. And so being evacuated is certainly traumatic. However, this doesn't mean that the rest of the population in Russia feels the same way. And the problem here is that Putin and the Kremlin in general could use this narrative to strengthen the nationalist spirit and to recruit more volunteers to go and fight in Ukraine. So we have to be very careful when we're analyzing the psychological impact of what is going on, because it is not going to be uniform across Russia.
Now, Marina, do we have any verifiable information about the size of the Ukrainian force in Russia?
Well, according to Ukrainian sources and some Russian sources, there were 2 brigades. However, there is no verifiable information, and I suppose that the Ukrainian side would want to keep a secret how many reinforcements they would be sending to the Kursk region. Some reports were stating about 1,000 people, but I believe there are much more than that, at least 3,000 to 4,000 might be already in the Kursk region at this point. Whether there will be more remains to be seen. It seems that Ukraine has prepared the reserves in order to deploy them as the situation unfolds on the ground. But generally speaking, it's very difficult to estimate it at this point.
From the advance we've already seen, why do you think Russia was unable to stop Ukrainian forces from entering?
Well, according to official reports, there was only one line of defense. That was a weak spot, and the Ukrainian side has been able to exploit that weak spot and the porosity of the border in order to conduct this offensive in Kursk. And I think that is one of the reasons why this location was chosen, because the Ukrainian side knew that they could get through very easily without a lot of resistance. And inside Russia, and especially inside the Ministry of Defense and among the intelligence services, I'm sure that they are already looking for a guilty party. And the other reason for that is that Ukraine succeeded in Maskirovka. We have seen a similar thing being done by Russia in the Kharkiv region, where the Ukrainian side was caught off guard. And now the Ukrainians said, well, both parties can play this game. And so they managed to conceal those 2 battalions that they essentially deployed to Kursk.
And let's talk about hardware briefly. Do we know what weapons Ukraine is using inside Russia?
Well, if we look at the reports, it's not clear the extent of Western technology that is being used, but at least some footage which has not been verified shows some Stryker vehicles, some Bradleys, also some HIMARS artillery. So there is at least American equipment being used in this Kursk offensive.
And what about German weapons? When asked on this point, a government spokesperson here refused to answer it, saying that it would be unwise to make public statements about it.
Well, I believe that Germany wouldn't want to publicly disclose what kind of weapons are being used, even if they said that they stand behind Ukraine. That being said, I don't know. I have not been able to verify anything. So at this point, it would be only a speculation.
That will have to remain an open question for us. Let's turn briefly to Zaporizhia. We have seen claims that a fire at this plant was caused by burning car tires in the cooling tower. What do you make of that, and why might Russia be interested in doing that?
Well, at this point, we don't know what exactly happened, and there are conflicting reports. The International Atomic Energy Agency has also confirmed some shelling without saying which side, where it came from. So potentially, let's assume if the Russians were behind it, it could have been done in order to divert attention from what is happening in the Kursk region. But other than that, I don't see any other reason, or if it has any significance in the whole strategic picture. But it might have been a way to shift the attention away, because obviously if something happens at that nuclear power plant, everybody understands that there is a risk that if the cooling tower is not working, that there might be overheating of the reactors and there might be an explosion. That being said, neither side, I think, at this stage is interested in actually damaging the nuclear power plant to bring it to an explosion, because it would affect both sides pretty much, as well as have wider ramifications for the region and beyond.
Indeed, the stakes are high there. Well, thank you, as always, for your insights. That is Marina Maron with the War Studies Department at King's College London.
Thank you for having me.